Hello, and welcome to Redis 2020, creating a community-driven project. My name is Madeline Olson. I am a senior software development engineer here at AWS, and I'm also a member of the Redis core team.
My name is Yossi Gottlieb, and I'm the co-leader of the Redis open source project and chief architect at Redis Labs. If you are up to date with Redis news, you probably already know that a lot has been going on lately with Redis. Earlier this year, Redis 6 was released. That was a very big release with lots of new stuff. A new REST protocol version 3, TLS, ACLs, client-side caching, diskless replicas, and more. But the biggest news were that Salvatore Sanfilippo, who is also known as Anti-Res, has stepped back, and the project got a new governance model. Salvatore created and maintained Redis for over 10 years, so that's a big thing for the project. In this session, we'll share this story, and we'll start by looking back at the Redis history, see how the new governance model came to be, and talk a bit about what's coming up next for Redis. I want to start by taking a quick look at the Redis timeline and how it evolved over the years. Salvatore released the first version of Redis in 2009, and a year later Redis 2 was released, which also happens to be where I personally got to use Redis for the first time. Now, about 10 years later, I took another look at this version, and that was quite surprising. In the tech world, 10 years are a really, really long time. So when Redis 2 was released, we had no Kubernetes, no Docker, not even React or the Go language. It was back in the time of system admins and not DevOps. But still, if you look at Redis 2, it's already so familiar, and it can probably support some of the modern day Redis workloads. It already supports RESP2 as a network protocol. It had all the data types like sets and sorted sets and lists and hashes. It even had blocking commands, multi-exec transactions, and pub/sub. Another thing it had was virtual memory. That was an early experiment to handle datasets that are larger than memory. But that was dropped about a year later. Dropping features, by the way, is really an exception for Redis. That's not done very often. Then came versions 2.2 and 2.4, which were mostly incremental. That is, they mainly included optimizations and improvements to existing features. This is also a very common pattern where we see major features of Redis being iterated and improved over the course of several versions. Then came Redis 2.6, which was really significant. It had Lua scripting, which is still one of the most powerful features of Redis. It also had Sentinel for high availability. Then 2.8 had key space notifications, latency monitoring, and it was improving replication with the psync or partial sync command. It also had the scan family of commands that was kind of an attempt to stop everyone from using the keys command. Redis 3 was also a very significant version. It also took almost a couple of years to develop and release. And its main feature was Redis cluster. But it also included some other stuff like hyperloglog and more sorted set commands. After Redis 3 was released, Salvatore officially joined Redis Labs. He was still leading the open source work independently, but this did change quite a few things. The term open source is sometimes misleading, as it gets people to think that it's really the source code that matters most. But in reality, it's really not about commits and pull requests. But open source is really about collaboration, and it's about things like iterating designs and doing joint debugging efforts or brainstorming new features. And of course, in the end, it's always about the people getting to know each other, working together and building trust. So having Salvatore around really enabled those new forms of collaboration, and it made it possible for the engineering team at Redis Labs to take a much more active part in the open source development. And that turned into more contributions and also more significant contributions. But there was also more to it. We also ended up in closer communications with, on some occasions, a casual discussion could lead to brainstorming, and ideas thrown around ended up as big features like modules or streams. But back to Redis 3.2. So Redis 3.2 had incremental improvements to Lua. It had a Lua debugger that was developed by Itamar, and a script replication which eventually replaced the original script replication. Redis 4 introduced the first version of modules. It was much more limited compared to the capabilities we have today, but it was still a very significant step. It also had a lot of improvements to Redis operations, like lazy free support, psync improvements with psync 2, AOF RDB preambles, and the active memory defrag developed by Oran back then. Next came Redis 5 with stream support. It also had more powerful modules API and LFU, or least frequently used based eviction. Redis 5 also finally provided better Redis cluster tooling that were integrated into Redis CLI. And it adopted the term replica instead of slave, which was in consideration with many requests we saw in the community. So after Redis 5 was released, we again got into this new round of trying to improve collaboration between everyone involved with and working on Redis. And this ended up with Madeline creating a Slack workspace and inviting everyone to be there. But I will let Madeline tell this story from the beginning.
Thanks, Yossi. And with that, I'll continue on to talking a little bit about how we continued this evolution into building a Redis community. So I'd like to backtrack a little bit and reference about how Yossi was talking about how the Redis community, the Redis project, kept growing in complexity over time. Redis had a couple of central tenets that sort of guided its development, one of which was trying to push back against complexity. Redis has this document called the Redis Manifesto, and in it, Salvatore explicitly outlined that one of his goals was that he should be trying to write code only when it was strictly needed, and to only build complexity when it was actually ended up being worth it. And so, since this whole project was being maintained by one person, complex features tended only to be implemented by Salvatore, that one person. And so even though there are other big features in the community that were deeply wanted and deeply interested in, they weren't able to be addressed because it was hard to fit that sort of have others be able to build complexity into the Redis project. And so that leads us into this next problem, which is where I got involved into the Redis community, which was TLS in Redis. So initially, the model that Redis had around security was just that if you could connect to Redis, you would have access to it. It was kind of like Redis wasn't concerned about security. Redis was just like, it's not my problem. But in many real world scenarios, security is actually very important, and it's a required tenet for many forms of compliance, and corporations and enterprises care about making sure their data is secure. But since it was so difficult to implement within Redis, many people just instead used managed providers to implement TLS for them, or they were forced to use very complex mechanisms like TLS proxies, which required a heavy amount of configuration. Well, within Redis itself, there's a lot of different types of connections. There's replication traffic, there's intra-shard communication with the cluster bus, and all of that means it's very complex to configure if it's not baked in natively into the engine. So even with all this, many people attempted to contribute back TLS implementations. Many of them fully fledged, many of them even decided to fork Redis just because that they thought TLS was so important, but none of them ended up actually getting accepted back into the main project just because it was so complex. And that hurt the community as a whole because people weren't able to meet the requirements that they had for their projects. So this is where then I specifically come in, which is that I helped implement TLS within AWS back in 2017. As I said, many people were just deferring it to managed providers since they were taking on the complexity themselves. But we, as a team, wanted to contribute back to the open source community. So later in 2018, at the annual Redis conference called RedisConf, we announced that we were trying to open source, in another attempt, a fully fledged TLS implementation. And as always, it got a lot of buzz because a lot of people were very interested in that type of project, and people were happy that maybe it was actually finally going to get accepted. And we talked to Salvatore, and initially we tried to see what was wrong with some of the previous pull requests and address them, and try to build something that was less intrusive and fit more into the way that Redis was developed. And despite all this, it wasn't accepted. We had a meeting right after the RedisConf, and we talked to Salvatore, and we went through some of the code, and it was still just too complex. We still didn't have a good solution for the community. And at that time, we kind of thought, well, we were a little discouraged because we spent all this time and it didn't end up happening. But we didn't completely give up. Fast forward a year, back into 2019, there's another Redis conference, and we sort of tried to patch up the code again, and we sort of tried again. One thing that's worth knowing about the Redis conf from 2019 is Redis ACLs, the access control list, was also announced, which sort of is indicative that Redis was moving more towards, caring about security. And without TLS, it's kind of hard to justify having authentication and authorization, since sending passwords in plain text isn't the greatest solution. So after that 2019 RedisConf, we kind of all got together in a room on the second floor of the conference hall, and we sort of just kind of hashed through the problems we were having. We were talking through, what was wrong with the solution, what do we need to do differently, and our solution to that was we were going to set up a Slack channel, and with that, we were going to have regular meetings to sort of talk through the problems we had. So you can see here, I set it up. I literally went back to my hotel room and set up the Slack channel and got Salvatore to join, and that sort of started this, this community channel of developers. And that was sort of the start of how we finally got this very complex feature into open source Redis. So just to kind of highlight some of the original challenges that we had was that the original implementation used S2N, which is an AWS open source TLS implementation. And although we're deeply proud of it, it wasn't what was right for the open source community. So we ended up swapping out with OpenSSL. There was also that deep intrusive problems with how we changed the replication protocol. We changed how Redis was managing the socket states. And Yossi came up with this good idea of, we should build this connection abstraction to sort of make it so that it wasn't quite as intrusive and built more of a layer around it. So Redis was less aware of the TLS going on underneath the hood. And that's what ended up evolving into the final TLS implementation that we actually, that was finally accepted and pulled into Redis 6. And that's not to say like, we made it in one jump. Like we actually implemented several other prototypes, since Salvatore still really wanted to keep, simplicity at its core. And we ended up finally convincing him that, it was worth this complexity. And we believed it was what was right for Redis in the end. So that's kind of how we started this, developer community outside of just Redis Labs. So now we had this community channel, which had people from Alibaba. Twitter was a very big a company that was interested in this feature, and it sort of kept going on throughout the end of 2019 and into 2020. And we were able to kind of keep talking to Salvatore. We kept the dialogue open, and we were able to get a lot of other big changes. Things like we changed the client-side caching implementation from a slot-based to a key-based because it simplified a lot of the client implementations. We implemented a CRC improvement that was 4 times faster than the current one. CRC is used for checksumming and the cluster mode and the snapshotting. And also we were able to get a lot of new module functionality in. And I think sort of like the biggest benefit from all of this was Salvatore started reaching out to us more proactively for help. And so we actually were building this community. And so that kind of leads us into the next step, which was that now that we kind of had this community, Salvatore kind of finally decided to step down, and that happened in June of 2020. That we decided we need to move on. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Yossi, and he will tell you what happened next.
Thank you, Madeleine. So about 3 months after Redis 6 was released, Salvatore announced that he's stepping back from maintaining Redis. He named Juan Agua and myself as successors, and left us not just with the maintenance of Redis, but also with lots of questions around what's next for the project. Not having Salvatore around is a loss for Redis, but we also wanted to see this as an opportunity for the project to grow and develop. Our biggest concern at this time was how to scale up the project. Over 10 years, Redis became really popular and was generating a lot of traffic. It was a constant stream of pull requests and bug reports, questions, issues, suggestions, and handling and responding to all of this takes a lot of hard work and a lot of time. Also, the code base got much bigger and also more complex, and it got to the point where it becomes more and more difficult for a single person to be the maintainer of all of it. Redis truly needed more people involved and actively working on it. At the same time, we also realized that we need to make sure that all the changes we do are done in small, careful steps. We really didn't want to cause any more big disruptions to the project. We also wanted to be in particular mindful about the Redis DNA, this thing that's not easily defined but really influences what the project is all about. So the first thing we did come up with was a new governance model. And the new model is really very, very simple. It basically says that we have a small core team that is responsible to drive all the aspects of the project. Team members are elected based on their personal contribution and their long-term commitment to the project. Next, we had to come up with a team, and first we invited Itamar Haber to lead the community communication, and that's what he's been doing for years already, and is well known for that in the community. We were also already in a continuous collaboration with Madeleine and with Zhao Zhao, so we had no doubts that they are the clear and natural candidates to join the team. So we ended up with a core team whose members are all committed to Redis. We're all involved with the Redis with Redis and with Redis development practically on a daily basis. It also turns out that we also work for cloud providers that are all offering Redis services, and that makes those companies, at least in some parts, competitors. But all of this really doesn't get in the way of collaboration and cooperation that takes place in the open source project. So after some time of working with the new model, we can already see how this really works well for Redis. There's a real benefit in having members of the core team being involved and coming from different organizations, and therefore having different points of view on many of the things we are discussing and looking at. This is, at least to me, there is the real spirit of open source. So by having a new core team, we kind of concluded the transition to the new governance model. And of course, this is just the beginning and the beginning of a new stage for the project. And there's really so much more work to do. But I feel that we're all set, and we look forward to handle all of that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Madeline to talk a bit about what's ahead for Redis, what the plans are.
And to close it off, I'm going to talk about kind of what we're hoping will be next for Redis. So the first thing we're trying to do is get Redis, the project, into a healthier state. Over time, it's become apparent that one person wasn't able to maintain all of these exciting features that people were wanting to implement and all the complexity that was being added in. So we are hoping that now that we have a bigger community, we're able to sort of triage and get through this huge influx of requests that people have asked for over the years. So we established sort of a bi-weekly sync, and one of the first things we did was we created a new system of categorizations. We've gone through and tagged and labeled and assigned owners for a lot of the big important items. We've had to go back through, and there are years of bug fixes and feature requests that sometimes don't always make sense. So we've had to go through and close the ones that don't make sense anymore, and update ones that do, and maybe tag them so that we're more aware of them, because an item that no one's talked about for 4 years has more or less been forgotten. And then we're also able to get to some of the less important items like typos, which they're not really important in the grand scheme of things, but we were still very proud of the fact we were able to close about 100 issues, just kind of consolidating a bunch of typos and grammatical errors. So you can kind of see that recently, between September and October, we're finally at the point where we're closing more issues than are coming in, and we're hoping to keep that and finally bring down our backlog. But obviously, the project isn't just about maintenance. We have to kind of think about what's next. So the first first new minor version is going to be Redis 6.2. And we're hoping that that's going to have a bunch of new kind of just quality of life improvements to Redis that have been kind of missing over the years. So the biggest new set of functionality is going to be a bunch of just little features that we think are important to add. One kind of favorite command within Redis is something called the brpop_l push command. So what this does is when you have two lists in Redis, it allows you to take an item off of one list and push it onto the other. However, this only does it in a very specific way. You can only push it off from one side of one list to a specific side of the other, which loses some generality if you end up with a list that is twisted a slightly different way. So we implemented a generic command called lmove, which allows you to push and pop from any side. So then there's also some type of commands that sort of like missed arguments that probably should have existed. Within the stored set commands, there's commands called zunion and zinter, which do union and intersection operations, and they only supported store, so you can only stick the data into a resulting key. And so now we just generalize that. So you're able to just get the result directly back. And then there's also some, little commands which are just sort of like quality of life improvements. Get set is something you could implement with a multi-exec, but it's easier if you can just do it in one command. So what get set does is allows you basically replace a key with another one while still getting the data back. So sort of like a take. So this is like sort of the main focus of the version that we're hoping to come out with next. And that's not to say there's just new features. There's also a huge slew of new operational improvements. We have a new eviction mechanism that we're hoping will help reduce latency impact when there's a huge amount of memory that's been allocated. We also spent a lot of work improving platform compatibility with non-C11 based platforms, which was a big pain point for Redis 6. And then just also lots of little optimizations all over the place. We've identified a lot of bugs, and we're hoping that it will, help improve the stability for the long term. And so that gets us to what's our more of a long-term picture of what we're thinking about for Redis. And we're still trying to figure this out. We're not ready to commit to anything yet, but there's a lot of ideas that we have of things we're hoping to make better within Redis. We've noticed that there's a pretty big gap within the streams. Redis streams was a big feature announced with Redis 5, and we think there's a lot of little improvements that we can add there, and we're hoping to have that available at some point. We also know that the modules API, which even though it'll never be complete, we're hoping to keep building it out so people can keep building really robust extensions to the Redis data set. We also are looking big into operations to make sure that people are able to manage Redis effectively, in all the ways that they deploy it. There's been a lot of interest in trying to improve AOF functionality, including some optimizations like being able to use AOF to do spilling replication data. We're also really interested in some of the new functionality available with new hardware that's coming out. AWS has recently announced the Graviton 2 processors, which add more compression functionality. So that sort of is an interesting space to sort of improve memory efficiency. We might be able to do something like compress memory in the replication stream or compress just data in memory to help improve performance within Redis and be able to store larger data sets without having to, stick in more RAM. And then also we're really hoping to improve the clustering functionality. Redis cluster was launched, way back when, and it's been almost 3 major versions since clustering was announced, and it's starting to show its age, and there's a lot of just little quality of life improvements that we're hoping to make it easier to maintain, more usable, and better for everyone. So, and then of course, as Redis has evolved organically over time, we're hoping to really just kind of get back into the fundamentals and rewrite the stuff that's become hard to maintain over time. There's lots of duplicate code and replication, the blocking system, RDB handling, and we're really hoping to get in and refactor that. So the last thing I would like to leave you with is sort of a call to arms. This community has a lot of very interesting things that we'd like to build out, and we need help from the community to help drive that. We need help from the community to just, let us know what you need, what you use Redis for. So we'd love if you came and requested issues, open pull requests. We also need people to help us build out these cool features. So if you're experienced or not, we'd love if you came and checked out the Redis.io community page and checked out the Milestone 10, which is our next minor version for Redis, to hope to see if there's anything interesting that you can help with. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for attending our talk. If you'd like to reach out to me or Yossi, you can reach out to us on Twitter. I am at Recondite and Yossi is at Yossi Gottlieb. So thank you all for attending the talk, and hope you guys reach out.